Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Positive Planet webinar. Thank you for joining us. Today's session is all about CDP, where we're looking to provide you with a practical business guide, perhaps for those of you who are new to it or looking for ways to improve or better manage your annual submission. So before we jump in and get started, just a quick reminder of some housekeeping points. You should all hopefully be able to hear and see us, but drop us a message in the chat if you're having any problems at all. As we go along, feel free to drop any questions that you have into the chat section as well. We will try to answer as many of those as possible in the Q&A at the end, and if we don't manage to get to those, we'll contact you afterwards to discuss them. We aim to finish as close to 1 p.m. as we can. So as I say, we'll get back to you if we're able to sort of cover your question in today's session. It is being recorded, so you'll be able to revisit anything later, and we'll share the slides on email with you, and it will be on YouTube later as well. So that will all come to you in a follow-up email after today's session. So with all of that out of the way, just a quick introduction to Positive Planet for those of you who may be new to us. We're a 360 sustainability partner, sort of turning those broad sustainability goals into real tangible impact. So we do everything from emissions measurement, product footprints to ESG guidance and accredited training. So we're providing that practical tailored support and making sure that we're enabling clients to do what really matters to them. We are a relatively small team, which means that our clients also receive our full attention and range of expertise as we learn more about their goals and help them align with their sort of broader business strategy. So today you've got myself, Bryony, I'm the head of sustainability, and we've got Emma Gray, our principal LCA consultant, who will be leading on today's webinar. So that's everything from me for now. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Bryony, and hello everyone. As Bryony mentioned, my name is Emma. I'm Principal ESG Consultant here at Positive Planet. I've worked in ESG consulting for around 5 years now, so working on projects from early phase materiality into strategy and finally into reporting against the various frameworks, standards, questionnaires like CDP for a range of clients. So before we get started, really useful if you could drop into the chat who you are, where you're from, and potentially tell us your biggest reporting challenge. So this could be data collection, emissions calculations, time on resources, or just understanding requirements. It really just helps us create a base of content for future webinars. But hopefully we might be able to answer some of those things throughout. So while you're doing that, we'll just give you a bit of an intro into CDP and specifically what it means for SMEs. So CDP was formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project. They have now dropped the full title and just go by CDP, and this is because they opened up new questionnaires around forests and water. It's a disclosure platform really intended for organisations to transparently report predominantly environmental data, but there are some elements of governance and social information baked in, but this is more on the corporate pathway. So CDP provides 2 questionnaires. You've got your corporate reporting and the SME questionnaire. Both are only accessible via CDP's own portal, and this is where you'll find your questionnaire, your requests to submit and who they're from, and your scores once they've been released. So today we're focusing just more on that streamlined SME questionnaire. So this route is intended for smaller businesses who are in their early phases of their sustainability journey. They may have limited sustainability resources available, and just those who are generally seeing more an increasing number of ESG requests coming from customers. So while CDP does allow SMEs to disclose information about forests and water under this route, we're actually just going to focus on the climate questionnaire today. It's the biggest one. Plus, you don't actually need to answer questions about forests and water. You can opt to exclude these questions with no penalty for doing so in your questionnaire setup. These questions are actually not scored at the moment as well. So CDP is really just looking for a baseline data. So we're just going to focus on climate today. Is the only scored questionnaire. So instead of the complex version, the SME Questions focus more on this foundational level climate disclosure. There is a threshold to be eligible for the SME route, and CDP would define this as a company or an organisation that has less than 250 employees and below 50 million euros in turnover. It's a little bit subjective though, so my advice would be to go through the questionnaire setup, and CDP will then allocate your reporting route accordingly. So why CDP? So there would kind of be three main reasons why you might have to respond to CDP. So the biggest one, the one that we see most in the consultancy, is customers requesting CDP disclosure and their scores from their suppliers. So this is where they are starting to benchmark their suppliers against each other. However, another large driver of this is that those customers, they want to see their suppliers' data so they can better understand and report their own Scope 3 emissions. Secondly, you've got investor requests. So investors will request CDP disclosure and scores from its portfolio companies, perhaps to understand maturity level among its portcos. But lenders and corporate banking members will request disclosure from their clients, really to evaluate the sustainability of corporate loans and align their lending portfolios with net zero targets. And finally, you've got the self-selected route. So this is where organisations can opt to disclose more on a voluntary level. So no one's asking you to do it, but perhaps you want to start reporting against a third party or a best practice external questionnaire. So where does CDP fit into the wider landscape of ESG reporting? So it's considered one of the rankers, and this is due to scoring. So what it means is that it's questionnaire format, whereas some of the other logos and acronyms in here are more of a sustainability reporting standards, and that'll tell you exactly what you should report and how. But a questionnaire, such as CDP, will ask questions about your current policies, processes, or data, and you have to answer transparently about what you do or don't have. So once the questionnaire is completed, CDP will then score your submission and give you that result and a score breakdown, so you can understand the areas where you may have scored higher and the areas where you may have scored slightly lower. CDP does add gating questions into its disclosure as well. So this means reporting companies can answer yes or no, and the questionnaire will adapt itself based on the response. So when you answer no, the questionnaire will move on to the next question. But when you answer yes, more questions are unveiled, giving you the opportunity to go into more detail and access more points in the process. So for example, one of the questions I've pulled out here is asking around risk created by environmental issues. So if you would answer yes to this, you will then move on. The question moves from number 16.1 to 16.11, and you can go into more detail about what those risks are. If you would answer no, the questionnaire would then simply filter you through to 16.2 instead. The more detail that you go into and the more questions that you can open up, though, it gives you more opportunities to score more points. And when it comes to CDP points, the scoring works on a tiered system. So SMEs can score between a D and an A to pass. Technically, the lowest score an SME can get is an F, but this is where they haven't submitted the information properly, or there was potentially just huge gaps in the disclosure. 2026 is actually a really big year for SME scoring. It's the first year that SMEs are actually allowed to score an A. So previously a B was the highest score possible, and the A's were reserved just for the corporates only. But CDP's opened up this leadership scoring bracket for SMEs, meaning that they are now eligible. So with that in mind, though, you won't have to jump through all the same number of hoops that the corporates have to get an A. So, for example, the biggest lever for corporates to reach an A is to have their sustainability data externally assured. This is not the case for SMEs. The scoring is proportionate, it's scaled for SMEs. CDP understands that these organisations do not have the same resources available as the corporates, but generally it will reward good data and transparent reporting. Also, the scoring is sequential, so this is one of the most misunderstood parts of CDP scoring. You cannot skip ahead and jump from a D to an A. You would have to meet all of the requirements for a C before being eligible to move up to a B. So an example of this might be a company might have excellent targets, but if disclosure completeness is weak, it will still remain at the score C or D. So CDP is really intentionally doing this to prevent isolated areas of excellence with poor performance elsewhere. And a few other important things to remember before we move on to how to respond. So number one being the admin fee. I would say CDP is a little bit cagey about their fee bracket, so it could really depend on company size and location. In some cases, though, that fee for an SME is waived, and that's most likely to be a UK-based company who is being requested to respond by a customer, and that company would then also be asking for no enhanced support from CDP themselves. So that's the only time I've really seen that fee waived, but they do change this, so it's worth just doing that questionnaire setup in the portal, and they will be really clear on what fees you'll be exposed to. They often change this as well, so it's always good just to redo this year on year. Next up, the deadline tends to fall mid-September each year. Always aim for submission a few days before, as other companies are always disclosing last minute. The portal can get really jammed up as well. So CDP sometimes will extend the deadline, particularly if the portal's having issues, but it's never a good idea to rely on this. The portal has been working better these last few years, so the chance of an extension is getting less and less. And finally, public disclosure. So SMEs can opt to keep their scores private in the first year of reporting. Where these scores are made private, only the requesting company, if this is the route that you've taken, will have access to it, and it will not be listed on any public CDP database. However, to score an A, corporates do have to publicly disclose. I'd assume this is the same for SMEs, but I'm still reading about this as this news has only recently been announced in the last few days. So responding to CDP and how to approach your disclosure. So many SMEs worry that they are not ready for CDP. However, the SME pathway is intentionally designed for organizations that do not yet have perfect emissions data. You may only have scope 1 and 2 initially, and you're still building, governance and strategy processes. So the expectation is really progress over time. So just a reminder, when it comes to CDP disclosure, it's really important to remember that around 80% of the questionnaire is emissions data, and largely this is scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 is still important, but the questions here are more proportional, asking about what has been measured, what has not, and what the business is doing to improve on this. So if you already have a measurement or are in the process of completing one, then you're already in an excellent position to respond to CDP. The information you need is pretty much ready, and it will just need to be supplemented with some context around strategy and climate risk. You don't need raw data files, you just need to input top-line information about your emissions and any historical data if you have it, but it's fine if you don't. And I want to be really clear on this next point. CDP is a transparency platform, so the emphasis is on transparency. The questionnaire will ask you if you have certain data or certain processes in place, and you will always have the option to say no. In fact, you will actually score some points just for disclosing no, because you're being really clear about this rather than trying to hide it. So ultimately, CDP wants to see year-on-year improvements, so always aim for that progress rather than perfection. And what does a good response look like? So first up, complete. So fine if you don't have all the data, just disclose this to be the case rather than leaving text boxes empty. Never leave anything empty in CDP. They will always expect something to be in that text box, even if it's no, we do not have this data. Be transparent, so don't try and hide or inflate your data. Be honest about what you do have. Reasonably evidence. What I mean here is you'll have this option and the space to be open about your methodologies. So use that to describe which process was followed and where proxies may have been used. And always be internally consistent. So make sure your reporting year is consistent, all of the data matches your measurement. Small mistakes can ultimately cause points loss, and that's what you want to avoid. But with that in mind, the response doesn't need to be perfectly comprehensive. As mentioned, go for progress over perfection and build on any data gaps. It doesn't need to be externally assured. It's not expected at the SME level, so you don't need to worry about going for external assurance. It's specifically exceptionally for your first year of reporting. And it doesn't need to be highly sophisticated. So CDP will make some allowances for SMEs, given that they have limited resources available for ESG reporting. So really aim to get that foundational layer of emissions data correct and then improve on the other modules as you go. So I've put together 5 steps for a successful response. So number 1 being build a small team. So if you can, include reps from across the organisation. As you have most of the data, it will exist somewhere. It's really just about finding it. And then you can start to gather that core data. So keep the focus on emissions and the metrics behind the measurement, including data points around energy consumption or company vehicles. And then you want to simplify materiality. So the questionnaire will ask you about climate-related risks. Don't try and identify every possible climate-related risk. Just focus on the biggest priority areas and disclose these instead, and then build on that later. Number 4, always be transparent. I feel like I've mentioned this already so much in this webinar, but don't try and hide data gaps or make up processes that don't exist. Just be open and clear about your current state and be ready to clearly explain any data assumptions, data gaps and improvement plans. Most of the time, CDP will give you the option to explain why you may not have the data available. And you're able to add notes to your disclosure. Also, top tip, it's best practice to drop in a timeline for when you think you will have the data or the process in place. Finally, always check that questionnaire before you press submit. It's so easy to make small consistency errors, particularly as you come to report year on year. So double check all the numbers just to really prevent any easily avoidable points loss. And once you have all of these elements nailed, you can start to think about an improvement plan. So the way I'd think about this roadmap would be year 1, get your baseline data together for your first disclosure. And then you can move on to year 2. So think about improving that data using less estimations or proxies, getting more insight into scope 3, and then considering reduction targets. And then to year 3, you've got the data in a good place, appropriate targets are set. So you can really start to think about how to score those leadership, those A scoring points, particularly by having a supplier engagement program and disclosing how sustainability strategy is considered as part of that wider business strategy. And to avoid common pitfalls. So don't treat CDP like a one-off exercise. Instead, build repeatable processes around it. So you can make it more streamlined each year. You can start to gain real insight into your organizational while driving decision-making just using your questionnaire. Don't try and do too much. So use the roadmap from a few slides ago to start small with foundational data and really build on that disclosure in the following years. And finally, don't copy or try and copy the strategies of large corporates. So these companies have got vast resources to throw at sustainability and more specifically sustainability reporting. So really just focus on what's actually achievable for you in the short term, mainly those smaller, more practical actions. And now how to use CDP, how to make it work for your business and view it more as a business tool. So in many cases, you will have to report to CDP because you are being requested to do so, but it can also be a really strategic tool for your organization. So clear and transparent disclosure ultimately leads to stronger customer relationships. You're answering their requests in a timely manner, improving your score, makes you look like a more desirable supplier. They're going to be checking the scores of those other suppliers against you also. Also, this type of sustainability information will be coming up in tender requests. So you've got everything in one place and that score ready for when it's needed. Disclosing score progress against a third party like CDP can really help boost your tender responses as well. Better operational visibility, so you'll be able to quickly see any policies or processes that aren't up to scratch or simply do not exist yet. Plus, you'll have those various functional leads feeding in, which can give you a clearer image of sustainability performance across the organisation in one place. And as you'll be collecting kind of energy information as part of your measurement, you'll start to see and understand how much is being spent on energy, potentially leading to consumption reductions. And subsequently, this will turn into emissions reductions, which is exactly what CDP is rewarding. Finally, then you've got the right foundation for net zero planning. So once you've got your emissions data and your measurement on lockdown, you can start thinking about how to get to net zero, demonstrating a really mature approach to emissions reduction within your organisation. So what all of this does is once you understand how CDP can be a strategic tool, then you'll view it not as a data burden, but instead as something that actually helps drive tangible value. And this mindset change enables you to drive sustainability progress internally. Cool. So that is it for the slides. So few questions to answer. Miles Harrington, hi both. Our measurement is due to finish in early October. Are we still able to submit? Yes, you would be able to submit still, but you won't receive a score. So if you miss the September deadline, you can still submit your response until I think it's around late October this year, but it won't be scored. Another one up from Miles. We're still figuring out our scope 3. Will we be penalised for this? So CDP does allow a lot of grace for scope 3 emissions, particularly on the SME route. The questionnaire will focus more on scope 1 and 2. But yes, you would pick up more points for being able to disclose scope 3 emissions data. If you're in your early years of reporting, then aim to disclose scope 1 and 2 and state whether scope 3 has been assessed and explain away any gaps. But if you wanted to improve on that, then you could calculate maybe just the most material scope 3 categories, and you can use reasonable estimates to do that. So CDP is really just expecting you to see you improving year on year. So just aim to build in that scope 3 progress before the next reporting cycle.
Thanks, Emma. I think that's been really valuable and useful to go through. And actually, I've learned some things there as well. I think one question I have around some of the process, I understand that they score for completeness, transparency. Are the submissions working in isolation? So are they looking at previous submissions and the progress that's being made between the annual years, or is each annual submission in sort of isolation and based on its own merit?
Yeah, so in some of the emissions module, you would be asked to report historical data, and then you'd be asked to disclose if your emissions have increased or decreased. You will score some points for disclosing a increase, even though that's not the right way, but you will score the more points for being able to disclose that those emissions have decreased. So it's trying to reward good behaviour year on year.
Okay, but the submissions themselves are sort of in isolation, so it's what you put in that submission solely that's being sort of addressed and assessed.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, it's a new questionnaire each year, and each year they will modify the questions slightly. Some will get removed, new ones will be added, or just the wording will change a little bit.
Fabulous. If you do have any questions, feel free to quickly drop those in the chat, and we'll hopefully have time to sort of come back to that if you're quick enough. But otherwise, thank you very much, Emma, for today, and thank you, Miles, for your questions. If you don't want to ask it today, if you maybe have something that hasn't been covered, then please do come back and contact Emma, contact myself if you want to ask any further questions. If you'd like to arrange a meeting to chat through any of this with Emma or any of what you've heard today, or perhaps broader ESG, then you can schedule a meeting using the QR code, which is on screen now. This will come in your slides as well, so you'll be able to just click a link straight from there if you need. You've got Emma's email and LinkedIn as well there. I have just seen that another question's come in, so we'll quickly ask that given that we've got time. But is the CDP similar to the Evergreen assessment? Would we need to do both?
Bryony, do you want to take that from the Evergreen side? So the CDP questionnaire is mainly focused on emissions for you as an organisation, but will ask some scope 3 questions and emissions data if it is available. And then from the Evergreen side, Brian, I don't know if you wanted to share a bit more context there.
Yeah, I mean, they're separate things. So the Evergreen assessment is linked to being sort of NHS supplier. And so it's a different process, it's a different submission. So they do work it in sort of isolation of one another, but I suppose you're putting similar things within them. So Emma's mentioned that emissions heavily focused in CDP submission. Similarly, for Evergreen, a lot of it starts with those that emissions measurement and measuring your scope 1, 2, and a subset of scope 3, and then building that out over time to build up those levels and build up, I think it's 4 levels of Evergreen. To that highest level, you need to be broadening out your scope 3 assessment. You need to be looking at measuring the emissions of your products. And there's broader elements of that as well. So they work in isolation, but some of the content that will go into them will be the same. And if you want to talk through any of that in a bit more detail and how that relates to your specific company or what you need to be doing to sort of move up those levels, please do feel free to get in contact with us, and we can sort of streamline some of that and make sure that if you are doing both of those submissions, we're not sort of duplicating effort across either of them. Hope that answers that one a bit. So yeah, if you do have any further questions, feel free to get in contact with us afterwards. The slides will be coming out today, but thank you to Emma and thanks to all of you for sharing your time with us today, and I hope you have a good rest of your week.